Arizona Democratic Party Executive Director Sheila Healy, Congressman Ruben Gallego, Maricopa County Supervisor Steve Gallardo, and the Arizona Democratic Party Legal Counsel Jim Barton.
Hi everyone, I'm Sheila Healy. I'm the Executive Director for the Arizona Democratic Party. So we called everybody here because we want to make it clear that yesterday, Tuesday's election day, was an absolute disaster. Thank you. Yesterday, Tuesday's election day was a disaster. It was a fiasco on all levels, from the top to the bottom. And everybody wants to know who's to blame, for good reason. One thing's for very sure, it's not the voters of Arizona for going out and exercising their right to vote. It's the Republican administration here in Arizona, from the top to the bottom. Governor Ducey's administration set the tone that no government spending is good or appropriate ever. And that, yesterday, hurt Arizonans. Secretary of State Michelle Reagan failed to coordinate with the counties in a way that prevented these long lines and these systematic irregularities. The Maricopa County election system was not the only county where we saw long lines and irregularities. And finally, the local county recorder's office only approved 60 polling locations. That's an average of 21,000 voters per polling location. This is unacceptable. We need it to change for the next election day for the sake of Arizona's voters. I want to introduce our county supervisor, Steve Gallardo, who has a few words on the subject. Thank you.
Thank you. For the record, Supervisor Steve Gallardo, Maricopa County Board of Supervisors, District 5. Tuesday's election was a perfect storm. You saw the reduction in polling places as well as a number of pieces of legislation that have come out of the state legislature that has created what we saw on Tuesday. The fact that you saw so many folks waiting in line 4 to 5 hours to exercise the most fundamental right they have, the right to vote. The fact that we have now policies on our books that continue to put barriers in front of voters and making it more difficult in order for organizations to participate has created this perfect storm. Later on, Congressman Gallegos is going to talk about some federal oversight, but we have to have that discussion in the state of Arizona. The fact is, prior to the 60 polling places being brought forward to be implemented, I made it clear to the elections official that we needed more polling places in several parts of our county. I was told no. I was told it was not going to happen. I was told they already had the votes to pass it regardless. That's unfortunate because the same arguments I made not only at a board meeting but in private, I made it clear that we were going to have problems on election day. We all saw it, the excitement around both political campaigns coming forward. We saw the excitement of both Republicans and Democratic sides. We knew this was going to be a large turnout. I want to be able to now move forward. Let's start talking about real reform in the state of Arizona, not only at the legislature, but in Maricopa County. Let's get prepared for the May 17th 1-2-3 election. Let's have an election day that's going to make it easier and possible for all voters to participate in changing our state's constitution to allow more funding for education. That's the mission right now in front of us. We need to find out exactly what happened. We need to know exactly what we can do that's different. We need to finalize this upcoming election and figure out what we can do to make sure this doesn't happen again, and make sure that on May 17th, everyone in the state of Arizona, in the state of Arizona, has the opportunity to cast a ballot and be able to participate on our May 17th Prop 1-2-3 election. Thank you.
Hi, for the record, my name is Congressman Ruben Gallego. I represent Commercial District 7, which represents Phoenix, South Glendale, Taos, Guadalupe, Maryville area, and the Central Phoenix area, of which we saw a lot of the long lines. Let's be clear, voter suppression happened on March 22nd. We don't know at this point if it was by chance or by planning, but no matter what, there's nothing that we can deny that voter suppression happened. There were voters that felt that they were being pressured not to vote because the lines were so long. There certainly were voters that had to return to work. There were certainly voters that had to go pick up their kids. Sitting and standing in 4 to 5 hours to vote, even if you end up voting, is still voter suppression. And the fact that people are now questioning whether or not their vote is counted at all also is voter suppression. First, I think we should also thank, though, the voters that did stick it out. While government may have let you down, your county government and your Secretary of State may have let you down, you did not let down democracy. And we really want to thank you for that. You stayed on that line, even though results were coming out. The fact that everyone stayed, and some people till midnight and did it, really shows the strength of democracy here in Arizona. But at the same time, I can't say I'm surprised. We have a long history of voter suppression here in Arizona, going back to even Judge Rehnquist, who talked about how she wanted more people to vote by mail. At the same time, this year was urgently trying to pass a bill to stop civic groups from helping people to fill out ballots, so that way they don't go to the polling place and ask for help. So to say that Helen and her association have not been actively involved in creating this problem, I think is entirely false. Let's not forget, though, that this goes beyond Helen. There's been a tradition that has been being pushed and encouraged by the Republican Party across the country for voter suppression efforts, and this is what you will see happen when those efforts take place. Unfortunately, it truly undermined a lot of people's faith in their votes. So what do we need? First of all, we need the Voting Rights Act back. None of this would have occurred if we had the Voting Rights Act. We would not have allowed such a quick decision that would have dramatically cut polling places, specifically in minority and working poor areas, in such a manner, because we know that what the net result of that would have been. The Voting Rights Act would have demanded a review from the Department of Justice. It would have demanded also input from elected and civic groups in the area, and we would have had an opportunity to say that this was not good. If Secretary of State Michelle Reagan, if Governor Ducey is urgently, as he said, trying to get to the bottom of it, did I recommend that they call their Republican colleagues and tell them to stop blocking the Voting Rights Act, which in the past has had unanimous support across the aisle. But you have members of the Republican Congress here in Arizona that are consistently blocking the Voting Rights Act, and if they truly cared about what happened on Tuesday, they would sign up as co-sponsors and encourage their leadership to allow this very popular historic bill to be renewed. Lastly, we do need an investigation. We need an independent investigation to figure out what exactly happened, how did it happen, how we're going to prevent this in the future. Myself, I'm a big supporter of Hillary Clinton. Steve Gallardo is a supporter of Senator Sanders, and both camps agree that something went wrong here. Both camps agree that we were equally harmed, but more importantly, we agree that the citizen of Arizona, the voting citizen, was harmed more than anybody else. And we want to make sure that whatever happened again does not occur again. So come November, this is what I want to see. I want to see more polling places in our working class areas. Prior to this, I would like people to remind that we have had problems like this before. If anybody remembers, in 2012, it took forever to count the ballots, and then we also had very long lines. As somebody who lives in South Phoenix, I can tell you, I have one polling place that is always packed at the South Mountain Community Center, and was packed this time around. And the other option south of downtown is Levine Baptist Church, and that is it. If you live south of the river, you have, for an area that fits about 200,000 people, there are 2 polling places. I want to see also more early voting sites. The only early voting site right now, if it's closest to South Phoenix, can be found at the county elections office, which makes parking very difficult. There's very few found on the west side, but there's many found in other areas that are not as economically impacted or demographically different as mine. if we can start with that, then I would believe that we have an equal partner in Helen Purcell who does believe in as much voting participation as possible. But the history has not proven that. This is not the first time we've dealt with this. Many of you have reported on this before. I hope you will go back and look through your journal logs and realize what happened 4 years ago, and also keep and hold everybody accountable to what they're saying, because if we truly do believe in stopping voter suppression, the only way to stop voter suppression is to give more voter access, and that has not been the case. So thank you, and I will hand it off to our lawyer, Jim Barton.
Thanks, Ruben. Yeah, so I'm here to talk about the potential legal actions that Representative Gallego told you, which is that before Shelby County, which is where the Supreme Court overruled Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act and Section 4, which is the qualifying section, there's no way that this would have been pre-cleared by the Department of Justice to go from 200 voting sites to 60 voting sites. And at the same time, let's not forget, we also went to voting centers, which put another step in the verification process. So that's another procedural issue. When you've got poll workers now have to use some sort of online database to determine that the person hasn't voted yet, which is necessary when you use voting centers. Those two changes in the same election, when the justification is to save money, would have never been cleared by the Department of Justice as a legitimate change to voting process. So when that happens, we are forced to consider whether or not this requires us to take legal action under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which says that if you have a change in process that results in voters being disenfranchised, in voters having their voting rights infringed upon, then you have a cause of action under the Voting Rights Act. So we're investigating that now. We're trying to see what happened. Again, I want to emphasize it's not just shrinking down to 60 sites. It's when you do these voting centers, you have this new process when you have to use the e-poll books. And we've had reports that there were problems with the e-poll books, that not only did they cause extra delay, but that the e-poll books also at times malfunctioned and didn't give the right ballot that the person should have to take. I also want to point out that a 5-hour delay causes you to consider whether there's ADA concerns and whether disabled persons are having their voting rights impinged, because obviously a person who's otherly abled is not going to be able to stand in line for 5 hours to wait for a ballot. These are big global concerns. Also, we're going to be directing voters to fill out HAVA complaints. That's the Help America Vote Act. Those are complaints that can be submitted to the Secretary of State for individual cases of where individuals saw things happen, like, for example, someone came to the voting line, it was 4 minutes to 7 and they were turned away. Those sorts of individual things, which are not a broad procedural violation, but an individual had that person's rights taken away. So all these things are going to require further investigation, but it really seems like this is the kind of behavior that merits legal action, and we're certainly going to look hard at determining whether we have a good case and whether it's necessary. Because as you heard Supervisor Gallardo say, we've got an election coming up on May 17th, and in that election they intend to use voting sites again, and we have to make sure that when our education, our children's education is being voted on, that it's done right. And sometimes I'm sorry is not good enough, and if that's the case, we will have to look forward to taking legal action.
Are there any questions for any of us?
How many people have reached out to you guys through your website or your phone lines who have had problems, and most of you just were the wait, or do you think that there's a computer glitch in their system?
We sent out an email yesterday asking people to tell us their voting problems. About 3,500 people so far have submitted the form, and we had over 1,000 calls on election day, all with people who were having issues. Most of the issues were the lines. Some of the issues were there was no parking for miles and miles. So they had to actually be turned away by police at voting sites. And the most catastrophic issues were when people had to leave the lines because they were elderly, or you can feel how hot it is today. It was this hot on election day for an elderly person who's just walked a mile to her parking spot. That's really hard for her to wait in a 5-hour line.
Do you think that that is reflected in the turnout? They were expecting 60-65% turnout, and it's going to come in way under that. Do you think that just broke people?
We were actually really impressed with the turnout on the Democratic at how the lines extended till midnight, the turnout was definitely expected. There's no way it wasn't.
We have no idea. We have no idea how many voters have actually walked away or could not wait in line. I was at the polling place around 10:30 at 7th Avenue and Glendale polling place. There was a group of employees that work in a nursing home just right across the street that had to go to work at 11 o'clock. Their shift started at 11 o'clock. They waited almost 3.5 hours. They couldn't wait no more. They had to just leave and go to work. So we have no idea exactly how many voters actually were disenfranchised in terms of could not wait no more, or maybe could not stand in the line as long as some of the other voters. We have no idea, but we do encourage people to call in with your complaints. We need to know who they are, and we need to know what polling places they were standing at. All that information needs to be collected and analyzed.
Is that something you'll share with the Justice Department?
I'm sorry?
Yes.
Republicans and Independents included also.
Secretary Reagan called for a series of public hearings, and she's going to conduct them in the bush-hit areas. Are you encouraged by that? Seeing those as a transparent sort of thing and open and democratic. Are you encouraged by that? And do you think we can shed some light on it?
I'm definitely encouraged that some light is now being shed on these terrible problems that have been issues in Arizona for many years. I'm glad that they're starting a dialogue, and I just hope that that dialogue actually comes to some action items where we're not seeing these kind of problems in the room.
I just happened over here that actually, this was, all across the county. I've heard anecdotally, and I thought it was just something I've never heard. I hope that the Paradise Valley is also affected too.
Yeah, this was. I mean, look, this when this kind of shrinkage occurs, it affects a lot of people, but it's going to disproportionately affect poor people, people of color, in terms of being able to drive somewhere, being able to have the time to actually sit there and actually wait for it, wait for the opportunity to vote, and just the areas that are most likely to not be voting by mail, because there's a rich tradition of voting in person, are going to end up being disproportionately of color or poor. However, that does not mean that voter suppression did not occur among Republicans, among the well-off. They too were inconvenienced, and there's no denying that. To your Reagan point, to Secretary Reagan's point, if she was serious about this, she would move even faster. The legislature is about to close up. It's going to be very difficult to get bills in, passed, and signed by the governor, especially because she's going to have to put an emergency clause on it. Instead, what she did this year was spend the time early in the year trying to gut civic organizations being able to help people fill out their ballots, make it harder to vote by mail, as well as making it more difficult and to keep large money, dark money out of politics. So, if she's serious about it, we'd like to see her move with more urgency.
And Barbara, real quickly, Barbara, on the May 17th election, because that's what has to be looked at. We need real reform in the state of Arizona when it comes to our election procedure. We need to start talking about May 17th. Is Maricopa County Elections Department prepared for May 17th? We know there has to be additional polling places. Are they ready to go out and have 800 polling places? Are they prepared with 7,000 board workers? Do we need to perhaps extend or postpone the May 17th election for a couple of weeks? Do we need to extend the hours? All that can be done by the legislature and the governor to make sure that May 17th, Prop 123, the education proposition is passed, or not passed, but allow all voters to be able to participate in that particular election. Otherwise, you're going to have disenfranchised voters. If you disenfranchise one voter, that's one voter too many. So we need to have that discussion while the legislature is still in session, where things can be done. We need to perhaps expand the voting hours to much larger than just 7 o'clock, allow more people to actually vote. And we need to start talking about, can we have 800 polling places in Maricopa County? That's a discussion that Maricopa County Elections needs to come to decide. And the legislature needs to decide, how are we going to fix the May 17th election to make sure that we do not have a repeat of what we had on Tuesday.
Supervisor Gallardo.
Who's taking charge here? Hold on. Let me get to you, Rebecca. You had your hand up first.
Okay, my question's for Jim. I was wondering if there, in the potential lawsuits you're talking about, if you could just give us a sense what kind of relief you would be seeking, I mean, and how that works. And then the second question I had was, early in the day, on Tuesday, we were hearing reports about Democrats who were being told they were independents, and I was just wondering if that was sort of borne out as a bigger trend, or if that was sort of one-offs, or if they ended up not being them.
Right. So first off, the type of relief would most likely be some sort of injunctive relief to change the system going forward. I will say there is a provision in the Voting Rights Act, if you can show that there's disregard for voting rights, that you can actually be forced back into pre-clearance, even if the Section 4 was unconstitutional. So I think the short answer is probably injunctive relief that would require a judge to take charge of the system, and so that the county elections would have to demonstrate that they had protected the rights of voters. As for your question about registration, there were many voters who believed that they were registered either Republican or Democrat that came to the polls and discovered that they were not shown as being registered with a party. That's a very fact-intense question, okay? And we're still trying to sort of pull that apart. You'll recall we've mentioned the 2012 election a couple of times. The 2012 elections, we had a problem with too many people being on Pebble, or people being on Pebble and they didn't know it. It turned out the problem was the MVD. It was just very easy to check a box and get on Pebble and kind of not realize that's what's happening, and that's what caused a lot of those provisional ballots in 2012. We wonder if there's a similar issue here with the MVD process, and if it's easier for me to leave my party preference blank than I think. We also know there's been some recent changes to the Service Arizona website, but before that, again, I believe if you went on to change your address, it was easier to sort of end up with a no party preference than you might expect. So we have to check that out. We also have to look and see if there were mistakes. We got to see how paper forms were processed. That particular question, like I said, is a real fact-intensive one we're going to have to dive into.
Rebecca?
Yeah, a few questions. Supervisor Gallardo, you talked about warning Helen Purcell that these changes would create long lines and problems. However, you voted in favor of the plan. Why did you do that?
Okay, good question. And I do take fault for this. I should have called for a roll call vote. I didn't. I should have been more forceful in my opposition looking back. At the end of the day, I informed Helen Purcell and Karen Osborne we needed additional polling places. They told me no. I informed the Democratic Party. I informed local media. I talked about it on a local radio station that we did not have enough polling places. Now, should I have called for a roll call vote? Looking back, yes. I would have called for a roll call vote. This way you wouldn't ask that question. But
Why didn't you vote no?
What's that?
Why didn't you vote no if you thought it was
It wasn't a roll call vote, I guess. I should have called for a roll call vote where everyone has the chance to vote. Otherwise, it just kind of goes through the process. I should have called for a roll call vote where, you know, Mr. Supervisor in District 4, how do you vote? You know,
And you
that
would have
sort of
voted
thing.
no.
I would have voted no. I talked about it at our board meeting. I talked about it beforehand. My chief of staff was the first one to be notified, probably early February, with this plan. She voiced her opposition in the chiefs of staff's meeting. I spoke with Karen and Helen a number of times about this. Made it clear we did not have enough polling plan. We were fearful that this would happen.
Sorry, I was just pulling something back. But still, you know, just to back, you know, and I've known Steve now for too many years. But he certainly has had dedication to making sure that we have as much access to the ballot as possible. So without a doubt, and you know, kind of hearing what was occurring, without a doubt, he has been advocating prior to the issues coming up for ballot access. However, the problem we have here, though, is a culture at the Maricopa County Recorder's Office that has consistently been hesitant to change and more open access for voters. Whether it's allowing civic groups to get more involved in the education and how people collect and put their ballots in the mail, or going and advocating for other voter suppression laws at the State House.
If this has been a culture for years that Democrats have been concerned about, why haven't you put up a challenger to her?
Well, there was one a couple of years ago, but part of the problem is even if you have a challenger is that you still have a Republican legislature that is committed to disenfranchising voters. voters. So this is a multi-layer problem. We do have a challenger this year. We're very excited about Adrian Fuentes, who will assure that all voters, whether you're Democrat, Republican, or Independent, you're going to have your vote counted. But it's not just obviously the culture there, but it truly is a problem with the Secretary of State's office as well as the legislature pushing a lot of these laws. Next question. Yes.
This year, one of the issues that has come up is whether or not the parties should have to pay for their own primary presidential elections. Does this kind of play into the hands of like, well, if we did such a bad job, you take it on?
Yeah, I think you look at so many other states, and setting up the election is the responsibility of the state. It's the responsibility of the government. Not all government that's spending is always bad, and in this case, it's really disenfranchised a lot of people when they made budget cuts that were really unnecessary and really hurt people.
There's a clear perception among a group of people, if you look at social media, who are Bernie Sanders supporters and feel like, for one reason or another, this was an effort by the establishment, Democrats and Republicans, to keep them out. Can you both of you say today you're sure that's not the case and why?
Sure.
So you take it and then
I am a surrogate, and I am a strong supporter of Senator Sanders for president. I've spoken on his behalf. I attended all rallies. I can tell you, seeing this whole process unfold, that was not the case. I can tell you, it wasn't Bernie Sanders supporters that were disenfranchised. All of Arizona was disenfranchised. It doesn't matter where you come from or where you live. This was a poorly designed election, and it wasn't just this election. And as was stated before, this was a combination of stuff. I mean, it just reaffirmed why Arizona needs federal oversight in the state of Arizona. This reaffirms why Department of Justice pre-clearance is so important. The Supreme Court's decision to violate the Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act was a bad decision. I think you do see a lot of Section 2 complaints coming out of this. I have a conference call at 1 o'clock with the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights in Washington, D.C., who is analyzing this. How far did voters have to travel, particularly minority voters, for the most part, to have less likely have transportation means? We're looking at it. We're going to unpeel this onion to see how bad it is. And if there are Section 2 violations, I can rest assured they will be filed in court.
But don't comments by the Sanders campaign manager, Jeff Weaver, that they don't trust the vote count here, doesn't that fan the flame of the Bernie supporters that think that this was right?
Listen, so speaking from the party, if I'm part of the establishment, I was running around all day giving water to voters, taking voters' calls, trying to help people vote. I want all Democrats and all people in Arizona to have the right to exercise their right to vote. So I was working tirelessly along with our entire staff to make sure that we could help in any way we could under these terrible circumstances. Next question.
So looking past May, obviously these polling stations are a complete disaster. But what about something like some other states, like Washington State, have done, where it's a mail-in ballot, where you can get to avoid that altogether? Are you guys even looking at something like that?
That's always an option. I can tell you tomorrow morning I have a meeting with Karen Osborne and Helen Purcell tomorrow morning to talk about May 17th. I want to see their plan. I want to see how they plan on Tuesday was a disaster. Throw that plan away. That's not good. The county elections office has 2 months, less than 2 months, to come up with a plan that will allow voters an opportunity to cast their ballot. Freely, easy, accessible. We need a plan. I'm going to meet with them tomorrow. We'll have a better idea. I'm looking forward to see what their suggestions are. The Tuesday's election, garbage, throw it away. It's not happening. If the legislature wants to look at other options, that's fine. Right now, the county recorders don't have that option under state law, but I really think the legislature needs to start looking at May 17th. What are the options? Let's expand the hours of polling places. Let's do what we can to make sure that May 17th is not going to disenfranchise one voter.
Now, do you think that they actually would have the opportunity to open more polling stations in the next couple of months? Is that a far-fetched idea?
That there's a lot of options that she could be using, and not just Abbotsford, but even other places across the state. In terms of universal ballot, like I believe Oregon, Washington has, that's always an option. The goal should be to allow more people to vote in a manner that we can all agree is accountable in the easiest way possible. That has not been the dogma of the Republican Party here in Arizona. This is what you see as a result of two things: austerity politics, where we try to do more government services on the cheap, and voter suppression efforts. And this is what happens when you do that, and this is the results of that.
Here's my question. And this is the question you take to Governor Ducey, who put out a statement just that following morning in regards to this election. Here's my question. Governor Ducey, did you know about the 60 polling place plan? I can tell you he probably did. I can tell you that. And here's my other question to Governor Ducey. What are you going to do as governor to ensure that your Proposition 123 is not going to disenfranchise voters? The fact is, the legislature is still in play. They're still right now they're at the legislature voting on pieces of legislation. It's controlled by Republicans in both the House and the Senate. The governor's office definitely has input. Let's come out with a bill real quickly. You can, if it's a fair bill, you will get bipartisan support. That's going to fix the May 17th election to make sure this does not happen. But I repeat, go ask the governor. Were you aware that they were going to use the 60 polling place plan for the May 17th election? Ask them that question, because that was the plan. I can tell you the plan is to use the 60 polling places for the May 17th election. Ask him if he knew about that and what he thinks about it. I've read his statement. Now, what is he going to do about it? The fact is, the Tuesday's election was a disaster. We need real reform in the state of Arizona. We need to get rid of this 29-day cutoff date. That's ridiculous. We need same-day voter registration. We need to make sure everyone has an opportunity to exercise the most fundamental right they have, their right to vote.
And Jim, can you talk about the meeting that you all had with the county elections office yesterday, bringing up the registration problems? We understand that you brought names of voters. They looked at the rolls, and they were in fact registered as independent. So, it wasn't like there was.
Well, first off, it wasn't that everyone was registered as an independent. Some people were registered as no party preference. So the first thing is it was a relatively small sample, okay? And the reason why I make the distinction between no party preference and between independent is that independent means I register as an independent. No party preference can mean that I just don't fill in the box. All right, so this is when I was talking before about needing to drill down into that, is we need to figure out why are there so many people. There's a news story every year about all Arizonans are fleeing the parties and they're all registering as independents. But now we have this example on Tuesday where we saw thousands and thousands of people who didn't know that they had fled the parties and didn't know they'd become independents. So I think what I was saying was we need to investigate the source of that, and we need to see if this is a situation where something needs to be done at MBD. Maybe something, if I fill out the form and I put my address in, I just want to change my address, right? Maybe I assume that all that does is change the address. Does that also, if I don't fill in the party preference, does that change that as well? So I think we just have a lot more data to gather on that.
So did you get answers from the office yesterday, and did you come away satisfied, or what did you hear in that meeting?
Well, we got answers about whether or not there was anyone who was registered as a Democrat that was turned away, and we don't have an example of that. That's not to say there isn't one, but that we don't have an example of that. We also got answers about the answers were more on what's on the form. Okay, so we did get answers on what's on the form itself. What we need to investigate still, what we don't have all the answers on, is how did that information get on the form. Yeah.
Wait, are you sure about the statement? You said thousands and thousands of people believing they were registered in a party, and when they arrived, they were told they were independents. Does the party support them? It was thousands. From the Democratic Party. I've heard some anecdotals, but what's your number?
There's a lot. That's the long and short of it. We're still going through all of the data, but we should have an answer in the next couple of days.
There's thousands of provisional ballots.
We know it's that.
There's thousands of provisional ballots.
People
most of those were
thought they were in one party and were told they were independent.
Not independent. We got to get some language down.
No party preference.
No party preference. Independent, you actually are writing down that you are independent. No party preference means you didn't put anything down.
Right.
But reason I know this is because when I first moved to Arizona as a lifelong Democrat, when I went and signed up the DMV, I checkmarked and wrote in Democrat. The DMV forms does not have a box. It has a write-in. You have to write in your party. And though I was a lifelong Democrat, when I got my voter registration card, it came back as PND. And I immediately looked that up and realized that they had put me down as a party undesignated. And I went back online and changed it. There are people that do this because they are educated enough on politics and they file it. There are other people that, well, I'm registered PND must mean something Democratic, and therefore they stay to it. So this is occurring. It occurred to me personally 12 years ago when I moved here, and I know it's occurring to other people who register. They believe they're Democrats. They get their ballots. They get excited finally about a primary. Maybe they haven't voted in other primaries, so they assume, even though they voted all the times on all these generals for all these Democrats, they went down the one time for a primary, and that's when they were supposed to do it. So there's clearly a problem with the forms. It's something that we've been talking about for a while now, and hopefully they will listen to us and actually do some changes on that too.
About people with the provisional ballots, what should they be doing? I mean, some of them are address issues, right? Like they needed a different form of ID. What can you say about, like, to make sure your provisional gets counted?
Sure, you can go onto the Maricopa County election site and you can put in information. You can find out whether your ballot was counted or not. So that's a good thing that we have in Arizona is you can follow up with that and make sure whether your provisional ballot was counted or not. If it wasn't counted, then you can look into why it wasn't counted and figure out how you can remedy it.
But you mentioned, I was just going to say, you mentioned people having the wrong form of ID. That's another huge issue that we need to address. These voter ID laws in Arizona are terribly restrictive, and they're going to really hurt both parties on election day in November if it is rectified.
And it is upon Maricopa County, the elections department, and this is every county, all 15 counties, to notify those voters that had voted a provisional ballot and let the voters know if their ballot, for whatever reason, if it was not counted, but why. The voters need to know if it's an address change or if it's a wrong party affiliation. They need to know that, hey, you're, for whatever reason, you're registered PND, but you need to re-register. Those are the things that I think the county recorder's responsibility is to notify those voters to let them know. I would venture out to say that most of the provisional ballots are exactly that. They were independent and party not designated. They thought they were able to participate. They thought they were registered Republicans and Democrats, and they weren't. So we need to address that, and I think it's upon the county recorder to notify them and let them know.
Sheila, is the state Democratic Party calling for any resignations out of this, or what do you want to see from Secretary Reagan and the recorder herself going forward from here?
I want to see a secretary and a recorder that do their jobs. I want to see some major changes for November. We cannot have this. Tuesday was absolutely unacceptable. I absolutely condemn the plan, and I think that we either need to call on them to do their jobs, do them better, or we need new people in office who can do the work.
So not resignations.
That's up to the voters to decide.
Yeah, that's how I feel. It's up to the voters to decide, but we need voters to be able to come out in November to vote in a new Secretary of State, a new county recorder. We need new change at the UC administration's level and at the legislative level.
If they can't vote, they can't decide. We need everyone to be able to vote.
Let's do some side. Thank you, everybody. Let's do some individual ones, but I appreciate it. People are about